So this afternoon, our session is on meeting minutes and action items. So everything from creating an agenda to documentation of meeting minutes, and then action items, not only from meetings, but directly as well. In the help file, this is sections 3.5.1 for the meeting minutes business process and 3.5.2 for action items. Because we've got an hour and a half just for these two business processes, I'm actually going to run through two scenarios with the meeting minutes process, and then jump into action items, and we may end up finishing a little bit ahead of schedule. So right now I'm sharing my screen. We're looking at the workflow for meeting minutes. You're going to see a lot of arrows here, and that's because we wanted to allow for flexibility in how you use this business process. Whether you are creating an agenda and then documenting the minutes or results of a meeting in Unifier, or whether you're simply logging the agenda or meeting minutes prepared by the contractor or the designer. We wanted a workflow that would accommodate multiple scenarios. So if you're using the full features of the business process, from creation, and any project user can create a meeting minutes record. That's not limited to any groups. And the intent of the creation step is to create the agenda for the meeting ahead of time. Again, if you're logging minutes after the fact, that's okay too. You'll submit for documentation of meeting results. This might be yourself or might be someone else. So if you are creating an agenda for someone, but you're not going to be able to make the meeting, or somebody else is actually recording the results of that meeting, you can send it to anyone else in the project. Or if it's yourself or you're logging perhaps meeting minutes after the fact, you can just select yourself for this step. The intent of this step is to then record the results of the meeting, including any actions for follow-up, as well as attendance. And then from here, you can approve, which just logs the results of the meeting in the project record. Or you have the option to review. And that's just if you want somebody else to take a look at the meeting minutes. So maybe you documented the results of the meeting and you wanted somebody else to take a look at and confirm. Then you can select anyone for that review step. They'll return it. If we need to make any updates, you can. Otherwise, approve, or if needed, you can cancel as well. The reviewer can also approve if there are no revisions. So if you're documenting on behalf of someone else, or you want someone else to review and approve those minutes, you can send it for review. Not a required. Again, you can self-approve as well. So creating flexibility in the process. So I'm going to open up my project. I'm going to run 2 meeting minute records through, one from the kind of full workflow process where I'm doing everything in Unifier. And then I'm going to do a second record where we're just kind of attaching meeting minutes that might have been sent to us from the contractor or the designer, just to make sure that we're logging those results as part of the project record. So in this scenario, I'm creating a new record in advance of a meeting. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just laying out my meeting details and creating an agenda. So what is the subject of the meeting? Let's say this is a pre-construction meeting. Date and time. So let's say this is tomorrow at 3 p.m. Meeting coordinator, which is optional. And then the meeting type, which I believe pre-construction is one. We also have specific meeting types for design review board, OAC meetings, pre-submittal, etc. Meeting location name. So where is this? If it's a physical meeting, if it's not a physical meeting, like let's just say we're going to do this one on Zoom. And if you've got kind of a summary purpose of the meeting, not the full agenda, but just a summary purpose. That's all we have on the main form. If we go to business items, this is where we will build our agenda by adding each agenda item. So I'm gonna go ahead and click add. You'll see when we add these, there are only 2 required fields. However, it does offer us places to put in the meeting notes and any follow-up action required to the agenda item. Now in this scenario, I'm just creating the agenda. So let's say if this is a reoccurring meeting, and you'll have multiple instances of this, like a weekly meeting, you can mark items as a standing agenda item or a one-time item. And then this item number just allows you to create an order for these agenda items. At this point, we haven't had the meeting, so I don't have any conclusion details or follow-up actions. I'm going to save and add new. And I'm just going to have a pretty basic agenda here. So I know for some meetings there are standard agenda items. And in my next scenario, I'll just run through attaching that type of stuff. Although I know that the goal is to eventually just create an Excel import to populate those standard agenda items. Okay, so this now represents my agenda. I don't have any related issues yet. This is to create or reference anything in the risk register in our risks and issues BP. So typically that's something that's going to come as an output of the meeting. And then my attendees, I can build my attendee list or who's invited. There's also a place to mark whether or not they've been in attendance. Again, in this scenario, we're doing this before the meeting. So I can fill out their name, any contact information. If they are a Unifier user, if they're in the system, so if I search for myself, if I select them, they'll populate this information so you don't have to type it. If they're not a Unifier user, you'll just have to fill in this information. So I'm going to save and add new. And we'll just put in a non-unifier user. Oop. It wants the email in a valid email format. Then I'll add Catherine in here as well. So something interesting happened here when I saved. It was a little unexpected in that the in attendance and included next meeting automatically went to no. So I'll have to take a look at that. I'm just going to go ahead and clear those, and they are persistent. Okay. We can update those after the meeting in this record, and I'll show you how to do that, but I'll follow up outside of the training to see why that's doing that. Now I can send, it's my only option, so it goes to documentation of meeting results. If I wanted somebody else to document those results, I could send it to someone else, anybody in the project. If I was going to capture those myself, I can just send it to myself by typing in here and searching for myself. Now, if I wanted to be able to print out that agenda, again, I can do that from the hamburger menu with the record open, or I can do it directly from this gear icon as well in the log view. If you did send it to more than one person, so if you weren't sure who was going to be there, whoever, if you sent it to multiple users, any one of those users could then pick it up and take action on it. So if you did want to send it to multiple people, the next step is single approver. So only one person has to actually take action on it, but you are allowed to send it to multiple people. And if I go to print PDF, again, it's going to give me that unifier format, which isn't always the most attractive, but it will have all of our information, including our business items and our attendees. Okay, so let's say it's now tomorrow at 3 p.m. and it's time for our pre-construction meeting. Let's say I brought my laptop to the pre-construction meeting and I'm going to fill this out in the meeting, or I'm entering this after the fact. I have a task now sent to me for documentation of meeting results. If I open up that task and accept it, all of the meeting information stays the same. But we can make edits now to our business items, and we can add additional business items if we need to. So if we had any notes, I would put those in the meeting conclusion details. There's also a question here whether or not this was a key decision. This just allows us to flag which items might have included a key decision that we need to be aware of. If there was any follow-up action for this item, I could fill this out. So let's say in this case, I didn't have any follow-up action for this agenda item. And reminder that I'm now selected one agenda item, so I'm only entering my notes for that item. And so then I would come on to the next agenda item if there were any additional notes for that item. It's not unusual to have additional items that weren't part of the agenda that were discussed, and you can, of course, add those as needed. So let's say on the site walk, I noted some safety issue. And I wanted somebody to follow up on that. So in the follow-up action, the default for further action required is no. But if I select yes, it's going to require entry into some of these fields. I can put in a brief description and a longer description if you need one. Oops, looks like I got a grammar error. Due date is optional. And by the way, what we're filling out is an action item. So what's going to happen is the meeting minutes record is going to create an action item for this that will be assigned to either someone in the system to take action or someone in the system to note what's happened. So there's two scenarios. One where the person we're assigning this to is in Unifier. And we can assign that directly to them. The other scenario is where the person we want to take action is not in Unifier, but we want to still follow up and ensure that it was done. So in that scenario, I'm going to assign this to John Smith, who isn't in the system, but I'm going to assign this to myself to make sure that we record what happened. So this assigned to will always be a Unifier user, regardless of who's actually taking the action. If they are external, then down here under external, select yes, and then it's going to require a company name, external assignee name. So John Smith with Smith Construction. Priority, just high, medium, low. It doesn't actually impact any due dates or anything. This is just a way to indicate what priority it is. And then every action item needs an approver. So in the case where this is actually going to be done by somebody outside the system and you're just logging it for them, you could approve it yourself, or if you need someone else to approve it, like if you wanted the PM to approve it, you can put that in there instead. So in this example, I'm sending it to or assigning it to somebody outside of Unifier. And in this case, this person is not a Unifier user and won't be a Unifier user. So we don't have to worry about adding them. We're just, again, making sure in Unifier that it's been tracked. Because that person isn't in the system, they can't interact and complete this action item in Unifier. So we're just sending it to ourselves so that when we follow up with them, we can put into Unifier what they did. This last block here, resolution details, this is going to be populated from the action item once it's completed. So these are all read-only. You'll see they're all gray. And that's because those will be populated from the action item that is created from this. So I'll save that. If I had additional business items again, I could add those. I'm not going to in this example. If there were any related risks or issues that were raised as part of the meeting minutes, I could create them here. Or if they'd already been created in the risks and issues BP, which is a separate training, I could select them here just to tie it together that, you know, out of this meeting came or was discussed this potential issue. And that's just to bring all the information together. I'm going to go ahead and add one just to demonstrate. If it was an existing issue, I would use the picker here under selected issue number. And by existing, I mean somebody had already created this in the risks and issues BP. If this is brand new, I will just say yes, create new issue, give it a description. A risk category, and a description. Now this new issue record number is blank because the system hasn't created it yet. If I selected an existing issue, there would be a number down here. You can add multiple if you need to. This is optional, depending on the meeting and what took place. And then lastly, the attendees, we're just going to mark who was present. So this might be a good example where you'd want to just use grid view. So I can select these three buttons here to just collapse that. And then again, select my Windows icon to switch to grid view. And then I can just go down the list and say, yep, Eric was here. Yes, John was here. And yes, so was Catherine. Now there isn't going to be a next meeting, so I'm just going to leave these all as no. And then save. So I've marked the attendance. Again, I'm going to switch back to the form view. So again, this might be something that's easier to just take notes when they're in the actual meeting and populate this after the fact. But for some simple meetings, and then you could also just pull this up in the meeting and enter this directly and save yourself a little bit of double entry. Okay. So now that I've entered the meeting notes for each of the business items, any follow-up action items, and I've noted the attendance, I'm going to go ahead and select save. Here I have two options. So if I don't need anybody else to take a look at this, if I select approve, then it's done. It goes to the end of the workflow and these meeting minutes have been logged. I can cancel. So let's say it was the meeting was canceled. And then if I do want somebody to review it, I can just select review. And then search for a reviewer. So just to show you that, I'm going to go ahead and send it for review. Regardless of whether you send this for review or you approve it, when you send it, the system's going to create that action item automatically. So if you had any business items that had followed up and that you had assigned to somebody, it's going to create that action item. I'll come back to that action item. So right now I'm looking at the meeting minutes that has been sent for review. So it's already been entered. I just want somebody else to take a look at these notes in case I missed something. So they can review all the information. If there'd been any comments. Then we've also allowed the reviewer to make changes. So if you wanted them to be able to make changes and then just close it out without having to send it back for revisions, they can do that. So when they click send, again, they could add a general comment and ask you to revise something or approve it. This could also be used prior to the meeting occurring if you wanted to have someone review and approve the agenda prior to the meeting. And then, you know, they would just select revise, it would come back to you, and then you would be able to log the meeting minutes, and then you could send it back out again for review. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and approve because the meeting's already occurred. I'm happy with the way it has been noted. And then that drops off of my task list. If I go to my meeting minutes log under communication management, I now have a, my pre-construction meeting is sitting here completed, which means it's reached the end of the workflow. And if I need to review any of that information, I can. Now, of course, there's still that follow-up item. So depending on the meeting, depending on the project, how you're managing it, the urgency of the action item, you might want to wait to close out those meeting minutes until all the action items are done. Now, in this case, I've sent myself an action item to follow up with somebody who's outside of Unifier. So I'm going to check with John Smith and make sure that he followed up on that. And then in the action items, I can just go ahead and log the action that he took and that he communicated to me. Again, this is just creating an action item for follow-up so we don't lose sight of that required follow-up. I see all the information that we entered in from the meeting minutes item. And then here we would just indicate what actions we're taking. So let's say the railing was replaced. Again, I didn't do it, John Smith did, but I'm just logging it in Unifier because he's not in here. And then I can hit send. I have two options. I'll get into that more when we get into action items. In this case, I'm just going to select review, and then it's going to go to that action item approver, which might be yourself in some cases, or it might be the PM or whoever is best to validate that that action has been completed. And then just to show you what happens here, I'm going to go ahead and take action as the action item approver. Again, this might be yourself. If it is, you can use that action without preview to kind of speed this along, especially if you've got, you know, a bunch of action items coming out of a meeting. If you're updating them all at once, you could just use that action without preview to kind of move them all along a little bit faster. So again, I'm just approving that this action was complete. If it wasn't, I could send it back. If this is no longer relevant, I could cancel. In this case, I'm just going to say it's complete, which ends the workflow. And now when I go back to the meeting minutes record, and if I go back to that business item, okay, it looks like it's still coming through, but I can see that the start date and the current item status, but it can take a few minutes to populate all the information. So if I go to related issues, you remember we created a new issue. That now has an issue record number. And I could click this to open the issue directly. For those of you who haven't seen it or haven't looked, reference records is also going to show me everything that's related to this meeting minute. So if I view the graphic, I can see, okay, there was an action item. If I had multiple action items, I could see those. I also see my risk and issue record that we just created. From here, I can open any one of these records. It's just a kind of an easy way to see all of the other related records in the system and be able to open those and check the status on those if you need to. So in the case where you had a meeting where you might have created 8 different action items to follow up on different things, and you just want to be able to see a quick list of those and be able to open up any one of those. So here's the action item. I can just double click and open the record directly from here. And also see what action was taken. Okay. So if you haven't checked out reference records before, it's kind of a great place to see related records in the system. All right. Also, because we created that risks and issued item, it's also in the risks and issues log. So here we can see this safety issue. Again, not every meeting is going to result in one of those, but I just wanted to show you what happens when you add a risk and issue item. All right. I'm going to create another meeting minutes. Just to show you a slightly different approach. So there's kind of a few scenarios. So one might be where you get the agenda or you've created the agenda outside the system, and you want to log that in the system before the meeting. You can come in here, fill out the meeting information, and simply attach the agenda. I would note that in the purpose so people don't go looking in the business items or attendees. So if you had an agenda and or attendee list and just wanted to attach those, or in the case where the meeting's already taken place and you're getting the meeting minutes perhaps from the contractor or the designer, you could simply attach those right here at creation. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach something. So let's just say this was a OAC meeting. And let's just say it was from Tuesday at 5 p.m. And I'm just attaching the meeting minutes. Unifier is going to publish this attachment into the document manager. So even though we haven't created business items and attendees, it's still getting logged in as part of the system record. Now, if there were certain items that I wanted to create action items for to follow up on, I would just have to come into business items and add one for each action item and then assign it to someone for follow-up. Just remember that if they're not in Unifier, you're going to need to assign that to yourself or someone else in Unifier to note what that non-Unifier user did. The BP is not going to require any action items. I'm going to send this to myself because it has to go through this documentation of meeting results. And then here might be a good case of, if we're just logging the minutes, we're not entering anything else. I don't necessarily have to open this to push it through the next step. I can just say action without preview, approve. This might be a little bit tricky until you get familiar with the workflows because you're not always going to know what the next step is. But once you start getting familiar, this can be a big time saver. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send. Drops off my list, and now I've got that other meeting minutes logged. Now, if you're someone who likes a lot of data to be logged in your project, you also have the option of converting those minutes into line items in the BP. It's all going to depend on how much, what's going to provide the best value. Now, as I mentioned, Unifier is putting anything you attach into the document manager. So if we come into documents in document manager, and the first thing I like to do when I come into documents is switch to the tree view. So there's kind of this node view, which turns it into more of a folder structure that you can expand and collapse. So the first thing I do is go to tree view, and then I also expand all, because then this is going to show me any folder that has any files in it. So now I can scroll down under communication. I see some user management. Under feasibility, I see our feasibility study we did earlier today. Got my budget and my funding request. And then under meeting information, here's our first meeting minutes. So I get just the Unifier PDF. I'll open that up to show you. So just like I showed you to print for the agenda, it's just that Unifier PDF. And then for the second scenario we did, I've got the attachment then of those meeting minutes, and that's all getting published to the document manager. And hopefully the Meridian integration will be fully turned on here in the next 30 days or so, and this information will start translating over to Meridian. Okay, and that is meeting minutes. So you kind of saw action items a little bit already. Action items can be created from a couple of other business processes as well as manually. So I'm going to manually create one to show you. They can also be created, as you saw, through meeting minutes, as well as punch lists. So once we get the vendors in the system, we can actually assign those punch list items to somebody in the system to then follow up on through an action item. Now, action items can be a great way to save an email back and forth if you just have something that you want somebody to do or needs to be done. Again, the benefit of doing it in Unifier is you're logging it with the project record. If it's only an email, then it becomes a little bit disconnected from Unifier. So I'm going to go ahead and create an action item. And the two main things about action items are they require somebody to assign the action item to, and then they require somebody to approve that action item. So let's say not that this would be needed for project documentation. Let's say I want somebody to make coffee. Oops. I'm gonna assign that to Lainey. So Lainey, I just volunteered you to take action on this task once I send it. Priority is pretty low. In this case, Lainey's in the system, so I don't need to fill out whether or not she's an external assignee. I can just leave that blank. Or say no, and then that just makes these read-only. Because she's in the system, we know her email, and that populated for us. And in this case, I'm going to approve the action item once I see that the coffee's been made. But again, I could assign this to any user in the project, and then I could select myself or any other user in the project to approve it, even if that's the same person I'm assigning it to. So if I need somebody to self-validate that they've done a task, I could just select Lainey as the approver as well. Due date is optional, but available if we want to indicate when we want this due. It's not enforced as part of the workflow. It's just information that whoever gets the task needs to be aware of. If I wanted to provide additional details, like maybe what type of coffee, or add any additional notes, I could do that here. And then this related business processes, this is all automatically filled out, so you don't have to worry about anything here. This is just for reporting, so we can know which action items were created manually versus which ones came from a meeting minutes record or a punch list items record. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and send. There's only one option, which is to submit for action. You'll see Lainey's name in the two. You'll also see all project users. That doesn't mean it's going to all project users. That just means that is the group that we've filtered from. Like I mentioned, you can pick anybody in the project. And so when you pick somebody, you're picking them from the all project users group. So this is just saying that Lainey belongs to the all project users group. It will only go to the individual users listed. In this case, Lainey. If I wanted to let somebody else know that I've entered this action item, I could add them in the CC. And this is going to send this action item on for action. Once I hit send, it's now going to add it to the action items log for this record. Lainey's going to get a task to complete. So I'll give her a minute to take action on that. And once she's completed that, because I'm the action item approver, it's going to come back to me. So let me just pull up the workflow graphic here. So I created it. I assigned it to Lainey for action. When she's done, she can send it for review to me. And then I can say, yep, it's done, or nope, I need to send it back because it's not done. She also has the ability to reassign. So she can actually change who this action item is assigned to. And if she selects reassign, it's going to go to that new person. So let's say she's not feeling well, she needs to leave for the day, and she wants to reassign it to Lori. She could clear her name, put in Lori, and then send it to Lori, who would then be able to complete the action and then send it for review to me, so I can validate that it was complete. Or I could cancel if needed. So if I go to my tasks, it looks like Lainey's already completed it and sent it back to me for review. I'll double click on my task. And then I'll accept my task. So what Lainey did in that tasks was fill out the brief summary of actions taken. It looks like she did pumpkin spice latte, which I guess is getting close to the season, but not what I asked for. So I could send it back, or I can accept it. But really that, and you may have saw me fill this out when I created the action item from that meetings minutes record. Now as a reviewer, I'm not going to change what she told me she did. If I didn't like it, I would add a comment. Sad face. And I could send it back. And of course she would know there's a comment because of the little speech bubble here. In this case, I'm just going to send it as complete. But if I did return, you see it just goes back to Lainey. If I select complete, the action item is done. It drops out of my task list, but is forever retained in our action items log here. One more note on that reference records thing I showed you. So that's available from any record. So we looked at it from meeting minutes to see the related action item. But if I open up the action item that we created earlier from the meeting minutes record. So again, this is the one I created for John Smith. I also have reference records here. And I can see the meeting minutes record that was related to it. Let me expand this to give us a little bit more view. So it goes both ways. So I can see like basically the parent record that created it, which was our meeting minutes. And I could open up that meeting minutes record directly from here if I wanted to. This is something I don't think we've shown much, and it's not always useful, but it can be handy especially when you have different business processes that are related to each other. And you want just a quick way to hop back and forth between related records. Okay, so the workflow for both of these business processes is fairly straightforward. For the meeting minutes, it's quite flexible, so it supports the scenario where you want to build an agenda prior to a meeting, or attach it, or perhaps just log the results after the fact. Again, it's all about getting that project record information into Unifier and then making sure any follow-up items are logged and followed up on. So both are under communication management. And with that, I'm going to, before I stop recording, I'm going to unmute you, Catherine, just so we can answer this question about loading directly into the document manager. Okay, you've already answered that. So there's a question related, can we just load the meeting minutes directly into the document manager? Yes, you can. Unifier is not going to prevent you from uploading anywhere in the document manager. So just make sure those are uploaded to the appropriate folder and given a file suffix.
Eric, do we have how to use the document manager in any of our current round of trainings?
Lori, do you know offhand? I can't recall. We might need to add that one.
Yeah, I think it got missed.
No, I don't think that we do. Now that you brought it. So yes, we may need to add that. I know we have the help file, but not a training session.
Right. I think we do want a training session because it's a little awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think for our group, internal discussion about something like a pre-construction meeting, a pre-bid meeting, those we might want to upload via the meeting minute BP so they get recorded as such for any kind of future reporting. But just ongoing OACs, there's probably no advantage if they're always an attachment to do it through the meeting minute BP. I would just load them via the document manager. That's my initial